Julie here with Sirius Talisman. This is Mars, our Venus day. Well, the ascendant is ruled by the Sun, 0 degree Leo. Mars and the Sun are still conjoining forces. We had a wonderful triple conjunction Venus, Sun, Mars, 19 degrees Capricorn. Now Venus is opposing Jupiter, and midheaven is applying to Chiron 22, ruled by Mars. Moon is 8 degrees Libra. Now, I want to give um, I have a shout out here, and I'm gonna start with yeah, I hope it saved it. No, it didn't. Oh, was that a short name? The speech professor. And I want to connect several things. One, intergenerational wealth, and the third generation crisis, which I addressed earlier this morning. Two, the image of wealth versus wealth, um, or what I have been receiving a lot of omens regarding the pyramid is upside down, um, in a different way than I guess it's said in other contexts. And I want to address the claim that educated women, feminist women, or free women, so to speak, um, collapse society. And first of all, here is the thing. Um, just as I think around the ingress of Uranus to Taurus, a lot of women complained that there are no good men, which was very weird to me because I prefer to learn communication skills, um, connection, embodiment, and so on. And then I actually realized that I still have my child needs unmet, which means, of course, I cannot find relationship that is compatible if I still need to be in my inner child, and non-erotic, non-romantic, not because I'm unerotic or aromantic, but because there are certain gaps to fill in my upbringing, as for many people. And that, of course, affect our attachment, relational patterns, and so on and so forth. Um, Now there is this notion of men fearing that women will not marry them or that they will not have children. Um, First of all, proportion. Men have been red pilled. A lot of men realize that they have been red pilled, and once they understand they have been red pilled, we can go to the deeper facets. One, if we go to extortion cults, Epstein's and Diddlers, not unlike the women, the men without a mother's love and or a father figure that is not rapey, not trafficky, okay, missing would be a child, boy or girl, most susceptible to a lot of things, horrors from trafficking, ritual abuse, and so on and so forth. Now, um, it doesn't mean that the children that have both parents don't have any risk. That's not what I'm saying. But this is where um, one of the things that extortion cult created, which is traditions and religions that live on slavery, inequality, um, rape-based society, is world wars and What happened after World Wars? Women got the right to vote, women got a separate bank account. So before, if I take to Hitler's regime, he made women, he evacuated the working sector, and I'm not talking about the concentration camps, I'm talking about how he won the elections. He promised more jobs to men, but he did it by bringing women back to work, and for each woman that would be at home to have so-called traditional family, the man would have supposedly her job and her position, which would go to taxation if they even survived the war, which would go to shilumim, to the people that were in the dead camps and their survivors. So we have a historical context where there was a regime that tried to increase births by traditional family values. And we also have the way it ended. Now, in the introduction to his lecture, Why Educated Women Destroy Civilization, basically talking about the fact, first of all, the very true fact that the more educated the couple, the couple, the couple, the couple is, okay, um, the more um, basically couples decide to invest in bringing sometimes less children and making sure that those children will have good upbringing. And if I think about what is needed to have family, let's say we've gone through the phase of curating the inner child or meeting the inner child needs. We need society in medicine. It's orgasmic birthing, which takes a lot of time and presence to learn through orgasms that are embodied. It takes food that is actually nourishing, not the food that has been bombed with the aftermath of industrial society. And a lot of that, which was taken to develop the A-bomb in Los Alamos, was later put into the food, into the soil, into the teeth. Just the testimony that we had a dentistry torture room in Epstein Island, okay, shows us the bigger picture of um, that wealth. And if we think about intergenerational wealth, it also shows us how it's lost at the third generation. If the first generation was doing Industrial Revolution, the second generation was doing Los Alamos for Milo, the third generation would be trying to dodge fluoride. And so, um, if, for example, if you live in so-called neglected neighborhoods that didn't have industrialized cities on them, you can still pick up the mallows and the calendulas and the thistles and the prickly amaranth that grows there and make yourself and replenish your greens in a way that you cannot even with the most organic food that costs a fortune. A, a hand-picked um, pack of greens, and this is what the Greeks, I think the Greeks call it herta, I don't know. Um, and so a handful of these, freshly picked, washed even halfway through, cooked even halfway through, lemon and olive oil and you have a side dish that goes with the fish, with pork, with whatever people eat, and replenishes the greens that are necessary for the liver function. I said what I said. Greenpeace challenged Standard Oil, but it cannot challenge the chemtrails. And when it comes to the pyramid being upside down, it's evident that when the king of the biggest empire of the West, that is King Charles, um, even gets cancer. And then they hide away because you had to do experimental care, and they hide what was the type of treatment. Now, this creates a facade. And when we talk about the women that supposedly bring a lot of children, so first of all, Israel is a place where Epstein cult is very, very active, which means that most of the births are not by willing consent. Even with all the movements against genitalia mutilation, if a family is, let's say, a Weld family, it is probably expected for people to be present at the ceremony where they do basically genital mutilation to the 8 days born son. And again, the more traditional the wealth, and Israel has fourth house Capricorn, traditional people, Saturn in sign of Leo, pride in tradition. The very orthodox societies that bring the plenty children are actually opposed by most Israeli citizens for various reasons that I don't always agree with. Um, um, okay, whether it's military service that is um, compulsory, and for the Orthodox families, it isn't, so it creates a sort of a nation within a nation. And the fact that Israel is also comprised of traditional Muslim population. And I say Muslim because to say Arab is misleading. The Christian folks don't have that many children. Not all of them, not all of them, but most of the Christian folks in Israel, I'm talking about the Arab Christians, they don't have as many children. Okay? um, and this is the more a couple can get out of the tribe where there are Hamula wars, the more they have understanding of what it takes to have a happy, healthy relationship, upbringing. You do not want to be with a woman you cannot have a conversation with. And I've seen that in my life. If I take a look at the past and say, why did a 10 years old friendship collapse? And perhaps even why it was friendship to begin with. Why weren't we just dating compatible partner individually for us? I see that when a person could only, I could only be their friend, um, because they wanted simple woman, an educated woman, a woman that is like a servant that does, that caters around the house. And they were intelligent. They had a lot of interesting conversations, and they don't understand that that's necessary. But basically, they're not attracted to those simple women. They're not attracted to those simple women. And when the woman is not that simple woman, they are scared, and thus they don't have to choose from. Because let's say if I needed to be a child before I can be in a relationship, and I wasn't misleading about it, I wasn't saying I'm going to be in a relationship, never. And okay, okay, there is rain and the cats come to the stairways. Yeah, recording. And but the reason that a person wouldn't have several women to choose from, and for them to be able to choose, and so two people are choosing one another, is because they live in this illusion that they want a simple wife while they're not attracted to simple women. Hmm. And then they get friend zoned. And then they get into convoluted whatnot. Because to begin with, they don't even cross the first bar of understanding that relationship is between two people that have a life also outside of being parents, both in work, outside work, in education, outside education. And that simple bar, if people don't cross the simple bar, it collapses society from within. They can have many children, they can buy a spouse, they can make money, buy a spouse, and have many children, but the spouse will not be loyal to them. Something will always be sitting in the background, and they wouldn't know to tell what it is. And that's to do with the erotic dynamic. And then there would be a great war. Both the men and the women that were trying to keep women traditional by force. What the knitting cult lady says, uh, the there was the single white woman, which was a made-up trafficking thing, and then she called it the skinny white woman. Again, they're all trafficked, and they gain their standard, or they gain their so-called peace by being enabler of traffickers. It's again, I'm not judging these women. I'm not judging these women. But the notion that a woman can be less educated, yes, she will have a lot of children, but it will not be by her decision, will not be by her choice. She will not even know to name it when something goes wrong intimately. And this is red pilling men, because a man, the desire is to have legacy, or people say to continue the bloodline. First of all, there's some girls that continue the bloodline no less than men. Okay? And secondly, legacy, this is where, how should I say that? First of all, children are children. They have their own existence. Children are not our legacy. Children are their own legacy. And the expectation that would be different can spark a lot of things. This is how sons and fathers would sometimes be in little relationships with another. Empires would fall because of the fight over who will take over the empire. Cain and Abel, okay, the story where a brother murders his brother and say, am I the keeper of, well, what if they didn't kill the son? Yes, a relationship, as much as legacy, is challenging. It is, I spent not only a decade to learn whether it's connecting with my femininity, how to communicate, how men and women communicate differently, or the masculine and feminine within the self communicate differently. Astrology of relationships. And a therapy that at times risked my life because I was also a researcher. And only to find out that there is a long gap of me being child that needs to be filled in an adaptive way. It's not compatible for relationship. And I'm aware the people that are sometimes running companies, big in society, they go to this Epstein torture room. And they're mind controlled. Is this the society you want to build? Because, of course, it collapses from within. Whereas sometimes having less children, but you say, but surely they don't want to even think about marriage. You do not want to marry a child. In the past, there would be child marriages. It created such a compound of intimacy issues. Women would emasculate men. And men would fear women like the biggest trauma. Because for a woman to get pregnant was the biggest trauma. And as well said, when society pushes men and women into marriage by force, it's not good marriage. To have birth, you need a health system. There are Mengele experiments in hospitals. It's not orgasmic birth. You want your legacy to be born with trauma, that all his life he will be traumatized or she will be traumatized, and he will not respect the father because to him he would be a rapist, not a father. And this is why the more educated couple is, the more they understand the healthcare system needs to be there for the people, not to put the residues of the minerals they mine for the industrial society, to put it in the food, to put it in here, to put it in people's. There was this Dutch comedian that talks about Dutch dentists, and he says they drill almost the mouth when they clean it, and they say, "Oh, your gums are bleeding," and then they put fluoride in, and this is. It's not just Dutch, okay, but and unfortunately, many people in the comments really thought It was the most accurate video he did ever. So much so that when they said that the next appointment is in 2 years, people were like, oh, good riddance. Now, this is, again, as challenging as it is, we can have the image of society, or we can have society. Having, and if you say, oh, nobody wants to have children, well, if people are tending to their inner child, first of all, we're going to have a war. There are going to be a lot of orphans. And the war is on sexual sovereignty, which I established in previous videos. So, who will take care of all these orphans if a family has 6, 7, 8 children? And the husband dies at war. To continue legacy, one needs to tend to abolishing extortion cults, creating true cohesion, not a trauma-based cohesion. And that includes the women. The men in the secret societies harming one another. And then they harm the women. Of course, women will not want to marry that. Of course, women would prefer not to have children than. That's the missing. Okay, that's the C factor in the claim that, oh, first of all, if we equate less people being born with society collapsing, not necessarily. In fact, taking care of 1 or 2 children, and again, I'm not against people that have more, but taking care of 1 or 2 children can be, but actually taking care of them, whether it's confidence courses, whether when each and one of them wants to have their own business, and vacations, traveling the world. Life is a legacy, is the experience that sometimes we don't even speak about because it's the pre-verbal experiences. I'm not saying people cannot have that with more children, not at all. I'm just saying that we have to be honest with ourselves. And the kind of parents that can grow such children are parents that live a life. If they have to do extortion calls, they live a secret, and then one of the children would want to continue the legacy, create a business, and then try to go on social media, try to go on social media, try to go on social media. It doesn't work. Why? Because it's a girl and she's feminist, and and people want girls to not be educated and not have businesses because the big social agenda, and the people who could help her understand why the algorithm is not picking her, albeit all of her attempts to be applying to the people. Because if they are targeted audience, they're marketed with hating the rich. And the people that know what happens behind the medias that keep people low on the algorithm, they are on TikTok, which is a completely different platform, because they escaped the secret cult that practiced under the guise of any religion. and has rituals that even the children are dissociated from knowing that they participated in as victims and perpetrators. Now that collapses society from within, even if there were two men, because it could happen to a man that tried to apply to, let's say, bridge the gap between um, common people and um, wealth and create new businesses together. That continues the legacy. But another man escaped, let's say, satanic abuse by a real estate company that is also the right to mine the natural resources, which means minerals. Okay? Now, that they will never meet each other on the algorithm, and if they will, there is there is facing to the fact, okay, if they're new money, it's easier, but if they're old money, it's facing to the fact that basically um, the overpopulation that was artificially created, okay, by force, is not really continuing the legacy. And in between these two men or women, there would be the social propaganda to hate the rich. Why? Because it's Uranus in Gemini and it's revolutions o'clock. It's labor revolution o'clock. Now, what is the biggest industry that is the foundation of all industries? Mining industry. Hmm. What will happen with Saturn and Gemini? The mining industry is going into civil war clock. We're going to have revolutions of the miners. And it's minors, these are children. Now why? How come? Because let's say I'm old money. But I'm old money from business to do with winery. We used to sell tinctures, but the alcohol would be to tinctures, to okay, with products that would be um, used medicinally. But came another field of medicine based on fluoride and other byproducts of the industrial society and took over our business so that we could sell those tinctures, but with less and less legitimacy, so to speak. And then we think about getting into a new field to preserve the legacy. Now, we don't have extortion code. We can run into the miners' revolution, fund them, invest in funding that, and and break in as a new company. Just like Gen Z revolution is funded by some schools. In fact, human rights is a blue ocean. If I fund for human rights and I can grant and keep them, then I will not have people revolting against me. I will keep a legacy that is real, that is authentic. It's not the image of. It's not forcing a lot of people to have children to have legacy or to have bloodline. Because, my grandfather's family survived Holocaust. Only my grandfather and his brother, family of 16 people. It is that easy to kill a legacy. And my grandfather was not allowed to try to get business with just selling food, fruits, vegetables. He was not allowed, and I know that he was not like Epstein or something like that because he was not allowed to succeed in his business. This is how I know he was not, even if he harmed children in his life, which I cannot guarantee that he didn't, I don't know. But uh, I can say probably was not like Epstein because he was not allowed to succeed in business. So much so that he had to sell the physical store where that was his. And and I understand, even my mother doesn't understand that. I understand, I'm the third generation, that's why we lost a family wealth. It wasn't big wealth, but they had a house. My father had his store. My grandmother was the main breadwinner. She worked at a chocolate factory as the one who was doing the recipes. She lost her 2 feet to that job. My mother saw people married around that were married not for love. She knew that she would marry only for love. And she was married 14 years, and then she insisted on natural birth, not IVF, not adoption. Today I understand it more than in the past. I'm not saying some couples have IVF, but usually they test the wife, they test the wife, they test the wife, but it's the sperm count. And there would be no reason. My father was a young, healthy man. There would be no reason other than abuse. And they were not family of poor family. The father was, yes, truck driver, my grandfather, from father's side, and but the mother was associated with church. In fact, my uncle, when he was fired from church, he began to talk about Lucifer and became taxi driver, um, which is very risky to become. And we had in Netherlands taxi drivers going missing or dead associated with exposure of extortion calls. So and my father knew how to do with the engineering of cars, like an engineer, by praxis. And that was his life. But again, to study with communication skills or meet child needs and so on and so forth, there are things that me, the third generation, sees all the way to the intimacy of to do with will and consent. People in my generation would think my mother was some witch mind controller because she got a man, was dating her for 2 3 weeks, and then they got married, and they were married for 14 years. In other cultures, it would be considered one night stand, let's say. But the parents, they were very naive, and it just works because she saw he cares for her, he's behaving like a man, and she said this is a good man. And they stayed together 14 years. Half Dutch in Netherlands, what people call sex work is actually sex trafficking, but it's sex trafficking by that it's children from extortion cults that were trafficked, horribly abused, and somehow are escaping there, and they don't remember half of their lives. And so people, even the people there, think it's sex work. For me, as a young child, for example, even in COVID, when I was in Netherlands, the news, when they said, oh, with COVID and so on and so forth, they said that less red lights in red light district because it was so embedded into society, so normalized, and but essentially it was never not human trafficking. And me, the third generation, can you imagine how much when something is so inherent in the culture and doesn't work with the internal, the inner self doesn't work with the outer self, and one does not understand why no dating, why no this, why no that. And Israel, many people are accustomed to. In the family, I was sitting in the train, a man, his spouse, and children. Next to the children, he tells me, but they tried to go to sex worker, and she ran away because she was trafficked, and he knew she was trafficked. Next to the children, he told me. And he was a chief of police, retired chief of police. Now, this is society that maybe has children, but is collapsed from within. In academia, there was a person who was raping students and using even spiritual rape, and then telling that these students were sex workers. Because he had to traffic people. And extortion calls to do with intelligence, something like Epstein. This is not society. And what do they do in these extortion calls? What do they extort the people to? To make a big war. And then the men get killed. And then what happens to the women? What happened after the Second World War? Two generations of men and women got killed. The women that were left with their children. They had to run their own businesses. I'm sorry, even sex trafficking, okay, but sex work would not be because the men died. So there would not be to whom even, okay, which was not a bad thing, but they had to create their own economy, and then voting was not something that, you know, I agree, when the wife is picking up the mushrooms and sitting with the friends and so on, and then making food, and then, I don't know, nice creams and nice this and nice that. Um, then her husband comes from work. Who cares what she's doing, right? She's smelling nice, she's happy, she's traveled, then it's nice that there's something there. Then she said, "Well, you pick votes, okay, for this, for that." Also, the men in tribes of the men, they vote what the rabbi say, what the imam says, okay. They don't actually vote. But then it began to affect women, and after war, women ran businesses, and they, if there was a decision that was made, let's say, on the bureaucracy of running a business, it affected them directly. For example, today, if I want to marry a man, yes, and let's say I'm tending to my inner child needs. Once that is replenished and so on, if I want to marry a man, in Israel, is no good. The divorce is always within some religious institution. If he's not Jew, it's a problem, traditional society. If Jew people expect child at 8 days to cut is not even is genitals of boy. The Ministry of Health persecutes herbalists to get a house that is our own house, that will not be homeless, and the man would have to go to war all the time. Then this happens, it creates society where, and if we divorce, basically, let's say we divorce, both of us need time to heal. The children are still needing care. Then basically what it would mean is that the country will chase this man. He will not even have, if I would need money to raise my kids, the country wouldn't tell me, okay, until you heal from this divorce, you get money to raise your kids. No. They would hunt this man to the death. If he gets disability, they will take from his disability so he doesn't have even food to eat. And men, sometimes they murder women. This is society that is looking like society but is collapsing from within. It's no legacy. If I don't want to be in such situation with men, I better not date men. It's not because I don't love men, but because the other situation around us is not allowing for either of us to be happy. If I make more money than him, I am listed as the owner of estate per taxation. If the otherwise, then he. Now, if he goes to war, men that have miluim, okay, I know you will like it's genocide and so on and so forth. I've given you example of what it's like a country with compulsory army that is active army. That the cohesion is created by trauma bonding, which creates persecution and creates wars perpetually. And then the men would go to war or practice to go to war. He will not be able to keep a job because a job does not want these men that are in high profile roles, combatant roles in the army. The more competent warrior there are, the less competent they can be as a man being the main breadwinner. And so, if I'm uneducated, I cannot have a job. And this is an image of society. And then if I have a job and I had to take care of the kids, there were men that were coming back from the war. And they had their own apartment where if they felt stressed, they would zone out. Now the woman was with the children and so on. There was this famous case because the judge said that either the woman would divorce the man or that he must be with his children. Now, if this man has PTSD and he's too much in pressure and he learns how to control his anger, he did shadow work and say, okay, but he has anger or he has rage, is not the wife is not to blame. He goes and distances himself from the situation. The woman still has to care for the children. She expects a man that went to war and came back from war to help with the children, to help with the dishes, to bring something from the. It's impossible, inhumane, insane. No couple can be happy. There are a lot of suicides, murders, even parents killing their children. And what else we have when big wars come is a lot of orphans. In fact, that is the end goal of a war, because then they can raise the children as new, as because they never knew freedom, they never knew another type of society. So if I was not educated, then I would not know. I would maybe marry men, maybe not know exactly what within. I would be frustrated. I would find other men turning me on. He would find other women turning him on. And maybe have already one child, two child, because we're uneducated, we don't know. And then basically eventually comes some better man, treats me a bit better. Okay, give me the, I don't know, the father confidence that I didn't get from my father and from this man. Just one example of a need that can cause divorce. I want to marry that guy. I need that guy to give permission to me to divorce. If I'm not Cohen or Levy, I can do that. If I am, I cannot divorce because I cannot remarry, or I can divorce and be unmarried. Now, this man will find his way to make me his wife because he also wants to have children and legacy. And I will never know why my previous man was so missing something. And then my new man would say, you know, Shirley, I heard in this class, that class, women educated, they have a better, pleasurable life. And I go and I get education and so on and so forth. But I get not just education. I also miss my husband. He's supportive of me. If he tells something, let's say something doesn't work for the intimacy, I question myself, what is there? Maybe I need to study something. Maybe Now, what if I study, say, okay, my child needs need to be met, then I can join my husband. I have this missing in my life. This is why if something was missing, because when that is missing, then sexuality cannot be grown, embodied. And then he doesn't have to feel like it's him. But if he don't listen because he goes with these people that tell him educated women is no good, they collapse society, they don't want family, they don't want this, they don't want that, and he has to do treason against these women, he's setting himself maybe to have family, but with what they call karmic. And he himself would be unsatisfied in the relation. And the legacy that he's looking for from the kids were not provided. Now, why did it work in the past? Because there is a certain evolution to humanity. If a society is based on extortion cults, humanity will not sustain the phase in society which we are right now when extortion cults are exposed. Because we grow technologically, and technologically growing is communication. And then we grow communication. One of the ways in which social platforms grow is competition to one another. Okay, when Anya Wick escaped the Epstein family, not Jeffrey Epstein, her father was doing this to 3 years old. She went on TikTok because TikTok was not owned by her family conglomerate. And this happens due to the progress of technology. Now, technology and society is the same. It's Mercury sign, Gemini. Uranus in Gemini is both bigger cities, but also technology, society, communication. People are exposed to new things. There are good things, there are bad things, but they're exposed to new things anyway. And today, for example, my mother comes to me, juicy story, and she said, Shirley, I think they need better Viagra up there in the business class. And I'm like, Mama, what are you talking about? It says, they try too many things irrational like a man that cannot. And I said, Mama, do you know that in some elite classes they harm the genitals of the babies? So the genitals are not even. And also, if sexuality is not will and consent, then it's frustration, and then they can get assassinated. In fact, extortion cult's goal is to assassinate people. And up there in society, there's so many extortion cults that they see sex as this. There are even people where Annika Lucas, a survivor of these extortion cults, she said as child, they would teach her to identify what was fantasy of, I don't know, business person they wanted to extort. And sometimes they would have fantasy that the child is dead. And now, what is the source of such death fantasy with sex? Is because extortion cults would basically be created to assassinate them because they slept with a child. All you really have to do is to show either you take the child and you say, you're gonna have a chance to assassinate the person that they no longer will rape children. Or they take someone and they say, listen, look at this person, hey, now look at this tape, and now they have, and they say it's for the money, it's for this, it's for that. Later the person gets caught, there's no money. And because they sense that, they have fantasy for to have sex, people that run extortion cults, okay, for to have sex and to murder the child. So supposedly they would not be extorted, even though it's always on tape. So the fact that they murdered a child after raping them is on tape, which means that they can get assassinated. It's a coping mechanism that they try to take the death out of sex. But this is also working for them because they were raped as children. Take a healthy man with healthy upbringing, healthy embodied sexuality, he is attracted to feminists, not to try to overpower them or to shut them down. Because these women, they know what they want, they learn how to communicate, they're connecting with their femininity without losing aspiration in life. And they're not ashamed for what they want in bed, orgasm and so on and so forth, and which is With a pleasure.